Spiritual comparisons are intended to show us that all is God, all is about God, all is loved by God. We simply have to remember that. Good morning, everyone. It is really nice to be back. You know, you go away for 2 weeks. Rima and I went to Ananda Village in California for Spiritual Renewal Week, an annual event that we've been having since the beginning of Ananda time. And because it's a tradition, Yogananda, whose teachings we practice here, started long ago. And it's really nice to set everything aside. There was a time when I'm looking at Jamana over there, just remembered when Jamana and her husband Vasudeva managed the East-West bookshop in Menlo Park, and Swami Kriyananda said to them, close the store for a week, the entire week, put a sign up on the door that says, we've gone to Spiritual Renewal Week at Ananda Village with the information, and go. And you know, that meant literally many tens of thousands of dollars of income, because the store was very popular, very successful. And it wasn't that, it was everyone coming together in spirit and making that a priority in our lives. So the topic today is capital S, self-reliance of the soul versus little s, self-reliance of the ego. The challenge, the dynamic that we all face every day. We wouldn't be in these bodies on this plane if we had transcended our egos completely. We'd be adorning some other place in the vast universe. And so I wanted to share Morley, our great friend Morley, gave a story again at Spiritual Renewal Week, and he basically gave my talk, which I'm very grateful for. Because the story he chose to tell, and he took an hour to tell it. I'm going to try to, just give it to you in a couple of minutes, the key point of it. But the story went something like this. Krishna, Lord Krishna, was an incarnation of God, was a guru. He was in the body. He was an 8-year-old little boy, and he had this friend, I forget his name now, but the story is about this friend and Krishna, because at a certain point they were very, very, very poor. There was some kind of war or strife going on, and they were hungry. They had nothing to eat. And then they found these little things, they call them, I think, pulu, and what it is dried rice cakes, very, very brittle and dry. And that's all they had. And so they carefully shared that little rice cake that they had. And what happened, as would happen in any connection we have with another human being like that, these friends became life friends. And through the strife and through the struggle, they became even closer. And so then they grew up, and Krishna said to his friend, come with me, live in my palace with me. Krishna was a king. He said, live in my palace with me. Help me with the work that I'm doing. And this man, this friend, this young man said, I can't do that. He said, I was born poor, I'm supposed to be poor, I have to live the life the way I'm supposed to live it. I can't do that. And Krishna says, no, come. And he said, no, I can't. And so the little friend went off, and he fell in love, and he got married, and they had a few children, and they were extremely poor. And one day, the youngest child of this friend was just about to starve from malnutrition. They just had no food. And the wife, who knew the story about his friendship with her husband's friendship with Krishna, said, let go of your pride, go to Krishna, get us some food. We have to take care of these children. And so he walks, miles and miles and miles off through the hills to the palace of Krishna. And Krishna welcomes him with open arms. And he gives him fresh clothes, and he gives him food, and he takes care of him. And then the friend said, I have to go back and feed my family. They're starving. And Krishna said, okay. He said, but remember, I am your best friend. He said, try to, if you can, come back and serve me, or find a way there to serve me. And so he goes back to his village, and he gets to the hill overlooking his village, and he sees a seven-story building, which was his home. It stood where his home had stood. And he went there, and he went in, and his wife was there with the children, and he saw that they were well fed and clothed, and it was just a miracle. It was amazing. In fact, I forgot to say that Krishna's palace was in the shape of the spiritual eye, and this young man's new home was the 7 chakras. And so, anyway, the story was about self-reliance. This young man had it in his mind that this was what he was supposed to do and live, because it's what he was born into, which was admittedly very important in those days, in that culture, in our culture too, for that matter. But God was telling him, Krishna was telling him, no, you have a different dharma, come with me. And he wouldn't believe it. And so he had to sort of work it out in a very difficult and challenging life, until finally he came to realize that his reliance and his alliance was with God and not with only his heritage. He had a spiritual heritage that he had forgotten about. We all have a spiritual heritage that we have forgotten about, or we wouldn't be here. We're all in that boat. It's all about remembrance of who we are. And so I was reflecting, Rima and I teach the Kriya Yoga preparation course, and I was sharing with the folks there the other night a memory, speaking of memories, of before I knew about Ananda, I was at UC Berkeley. I was studying linguistics, but I was really taking class in comparative religion and, things that interested me, Indian Buddhism. And I was 19 years old, and I was struck by the teaching of all matter is energy. everything is energy. And as every 18, 19-year-old can testify, when you get a aha thought, the fireworks of the 4th of July were going off in my brain. I was so excited with this thought. I was going around and talking to everyone about it. It was such an exciting concept to me. And within a few weeks of that understanding coming back to me, an acquaintance handed me autobiography of a yogi. The awakening continued. I read the book, and then he told me there was a direct disciple in the mountains, in the Sierras in California. I was in California at Berkeley, and it was only 3 hours away, that he was building a temple, and you could go there and do work exchange. So like any good 19-year-old, I packed my sleeping bag and went up there to do work exchange. And it took me a couple of years. I finally dropped out of college and moved there when I was 22. But the point that I wanted to get to is that awakening to who and what I really was, you really are, had come back to me. And one of the tasks that I had in those early years was accounting. I had numbers sparked my brain to ideas. I loved them. I saw things. My intuition came alive through them. Nobody else thinks about numbers that way. So I was doing the accounting, and that made me also in charge of putting together fundraising campaigns. And what I found was that with every fundraising campaign we did, I'd put out the energy, and then the income would start to come from it, but invariably there'd be at least one gift from outer space that would come, totally unexpected, that was large by our standards, and it would be like Divine Mother saying, "It's really me, it's really me, you're not doing this, I'm doing this." And we all always need that remembrance. And when you're trying to live the spiritual life, you begin to see things more in that way. So it's sort of fun to see, I wonder what's going to happen. I had the reverse of that happen in a way. When East West Bookshop was in its last location, I was just talking with Bima about that this morning, that we were looking, our lease was going to expire in April of 2020. This was January, February 2020. We were desperately looking for a better location. And we thought we found one in Kirkland. We started negotiating with the landlord, and you know how negotiations are. They're sort of slow and heavy and, complicated. And we got through one hurdle after another. And then finally we were ready to sign, and the landlord suddenly had to have a knee replacement surgery. He was in the hospital. He was under an anesthetic. He couldn't sign. And I was getting frustrated. Come on, we need to get this done. And he couldn't sign it. Then the pandemic broke out right then. And I realized, oh man, I was second-guessing Divine Mother. She had a plan. She saved us. Because if we had signed it, we would have been on the hook for $10,000 a month. And landlords didn't give grace for their rents. And so, there was a shutdown. And anyway, we were saved by the bell, literally. And we had prepaid in the other lease, our old lease, our last month's rent. So we were done having to pay rent. We moved all our things out of there. That's a whole other long story. But my point is that recognizing Divine Mother's hand is not always easy, especially when it goes against what seems to us to be obstacles that are thrown in our path. And so, self-reliance, big self, little self, is a constant dance. And sometimes both are going on at the same time. In fact, often that's the case. So that's, I think, why the affirmation of discernment was lined up with this particular reading. We need that discernment to know which voice is guiding us within. There's an illustration that I've often shared that I think is really helpful for this. I like visuals. Kriyananda, Ananda's founder, he loved Disneyland. And he was at Disneyland with some friends. They were an older Italian couple. And they were on that little ride that's the boats, you get to navigate your own little boat. And so he was in one boat with some friends, and the elderly Italian couple was in another boat. And at a certain point, the boats passed each other, and Kriyananda waved at them, and the friend was holding on to that steering wheel for dear life, as if he was actually steering the boat, which he thought he was. And he, went like that with his little pinky. But underneath, in the water, all the boats were on a track. We're all on the God track, and we're all sort of moving these bodies, and we think we're doing it. We're afraid to let go because God knows what might happen when we let go. But that track is taking us where we need to go, and we forget. So I wanted to talk for a minute about the reading this morning, because, I was reflecting on attitudes that are helpful to us for remembering who we really are, and attitudes that get in our way. And in Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda's autobiography, in the very first opening paragraph, he talks about the importance of the guru-disciple relationship. That relationship of Krishna and his little friend, the guru-disciple relationship, that's you and me. That relationship is freeing because ultimately it reflects to us who and what we really are all the time. And our ego shaves down and down to transparency of the soul. So that's his opening paragraph, and it's really the basis of the entire book. And then I was reminded, I picked up Swami Kriyananda's autobiography, The Path. This is an older edition, but the words didn't change. He says in there, in his dedication, to the sincere seeker, whatever his chosen path, A group of Paramahansa Yogananda's disciples had gone with him to see a movie about the life of Gyandev, a great saint of medieval India. Afterwards, they gathered and listened to the master explain certain subtler aspects of that inspiring story. A young man in the group mentioned another film he had seen years earlier in India about the life of Mirabai, a famous woman saint. "If you'd seen that movie," he exclaimed, "you wouldn't even have liked this one." The Guru rebuked him. "Why make such comparisons? The lives of great saints manifest in various ways the same one God." And what that dedication page, which is a very important message to the entire message, is talking about is non-judgment. Non-judgment of others, absolutely. And what I see often with devotees, non-judgment of ourselves, because we're shooting ourselves right in the foot. When our mind goes to judgment, you see, God is unitive, and the mind analyzes. And if it's judging while it's analyzing, because what this young man was saying was, this saint's better than this saint. You know, when we compare and judge, that's when we get drawn more and more into ego. Those thoughts bring us more into ego. So every Sunday here, when we read from Rays of the One Light, Yogananda's commentaries on the similarities between the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, he's speaking in a unitive way, whether we realize it or not, drawing us to a unitive understanding. And I just have a sentence of each, the Gita and the Bible. In the Gita, he says, "Know that his achievement is but a little spark of the great sun of my effulgence." We're all but little sparks of that great light. We're all a part of that, and remembering that. And then in the Bible reading, he says, quotes Christ, "Every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit." And that has layers and layers and layers. Because here's a branch that's bringing forth fruit. In other words, goodness. It's coming through, but it's never ending, because we have a million ways in which we keep making mistakes, even though we've just had the right attitude or a good thought. Our sort of bad habits sort of keep rubber banding back to us. And so he purgeth that, and it can keep growing back, that fruit over and over. He's also purging our ego. That's the other aspect of it. And so these spiritual comparisons are intended to show us that all is God, all is about God, all is loved by God, We simply have to remember that and stop looking for differences. Kriyananda was at Assisi in the little portiuncula of St. Francis, and he was meditating there and he felt this immense sweetness. And he asked inwardly, how can there be so much sweetness? And the answer he received, by never judging. So that's the thought for the day.
Lord of my heart, open wide